Good morning, everyone. Well, this is a sad day for Nabil. He's retired today. He lost his self-steering system and was hand steering last night, and conditions were pretty tough. And in the end, a bit of a struggle to get back to the Canaries. He had the option to come back there or head down to Cape Verde Islands, but he's carrying on, making progress, and he has officially retired from the GGR. So there's been lots of questions and comments on Facebook about Windvane self-steering systems, and a lot of people don't understand how they work or what they do. I've been sailing with Windvanes for 43 years. It's unbelievable to think. My first was a Navic system, a French system, back in 1973. And then since then, I've been intimately involved with all of the different types. And I was, we ran a marine equipment business for 24 years, selling, among other things, Aries Windvanes. And so I'm going to give you a run through on how they basically work. First of all, there are two principles of the systems. They're all basically the same. They're one or the other. One is called a Servo pendulum system, and the other is called an auxiliary rudder system. And we've got Antoine's boat here at the moment. He's got a Servo pendulum system here. And then we've also got Kevin's boat down the end, which is an auxiliary rudder system. Now, I'll do this in two ways. First of all, I'll just show you here on the back of the boat. This is a Hydrovane Windvane, okay, and it's just bolted onto the back of the boat. You can see it there, and it actually has a rudder in the water. So this is an auxiliary rudder system. There are no lines connected to the ship's wheel. If you look inside here, there's the ship's wheel there. It's completely independent. There's no ropes coming back to that wheel to control the boat, or if it was a tiller, there's no ropes to the tiller. This auxiliary rudder system basically steers the boat through that rudder in the water. That's the first thing that you've got to understand. The next thing is that the ship's rudder is then actually, once you engage the Hydrovane, you've got to actually lock the ship's wheel or tie up the ship's tiller, because the ship's rudder is not being used anymore. I'll just climb up here now and might get Jane to help with this, although I might be able to do it. I'll just try it single-handed here. Now the other part is that there are two parts to every Windvane self-steering gear. The first one is the Windvane itself. That's this thing here. That's what we call a flip-flop Windvane. You can see it's got a lead counterbalance here. This lead weight here counterbalances the weight of the vane at the top. So when there's no wind, it'll just stand vertical like that. Okay, and so when it's vertical, it's just doing nothing. So I'll hold that vertical, and if I can get this down here, you can see the rudder now is in line with the boat. Okay, this with the vane vertical. Now if I flop the vane down one way or the other, see the rudder's turning a little bit? You can see the rudder is actually turning to starboard or to port. Now that means that the rudder is steering the boat like normal. So if you want to go one way, or the other way, that rudder connected directly to this flip-flop vane here, when I'm flipping it from one side to the other like that, it's actually turning the rudder itself at the back of the boat, and that's what's steering the boat. Now you'll see here, the next thing that I want to show you is, well, how does the flip-flop vane effectively control the direction of the boat? If this was an electric autopilot, I think most people would understand that you have the ability to dial up an electronic course with your electric autopilot. You'd set the compass up and you say, I want to steer north. So when the boat, I'll just get around here, when the boat is then steering north, if the boat gets knocked off course and it falls down to port, which means it's gone a little bit to the west, the compass senses that, and through a series of electric motors it pulls it back on course. If it goes to the other side of north, over to the eastern side, then the compass will sense that change in direction and the electric motors will pull it back on course. Well, what you do here with the Windvane, you'll see now I'm sitting at the back of the boat. This Windvane is set up for a breeze that's coming across from this way, from this direction. Okay, so if the wind was on the port beam, I can change the direction of this Windvane, the bit at the top, by moving this little collar here. I don't know whether you can see that. I'm changing the wheel here, and if you watch this this Windvane, it's now moving around. As I'm changing the wheel, you'll see it's now starting to point in line with the boat. So the next thing to remember about this Windvane is that there is, like the wing of a plane, there is a leading edge and a trailing edge. And you can tell that very quickly because this is slightly off center. It's not in the middle, it's off center. So this side with the hydrovane on it is actually the leading edge. So the wind is coming down this way. All right. And so now, if you can see, it's leaning over a little bit because the wind has blown it over. Remember, it's got the counterbalance. But if the wind was coming from the stern of the boat now, and I'll try and just remember I'm looking over the transom here. If the wind was coming straight down this way, that would hold up vertically. The rudder in the water would be fore and aft, and the boat would stay on its course. Then if the bow of the boat now dropped down to starboard, the wind would hit this side of the vane, where my thumb is, and it would push the vane down, okay? Because if it goes to starboard, this whole vane here would turn around with the boat. The wind would hit this opposite side of the vane, this side, and it would push it down that way. If the boat comes back on course, it'll then hold up again. If the boat then pulls away to port, so the wind is now, to starboard, the wind is now hitting on the port side of the boat, which is this side, it'll blow it over the opposite way, okay? So that's, instead of using a compass, on an electric autopilot, this is sensing whether the boat is moving off course to port or to starboard by a flip or a flop, okay? And remember that when this goes back and forwards, flipping and flopping, depending on which way you do it, this rudder in the water here is actually a flip versus a flop. It's turning one way or the other. So what you need to do then to get on course with your Windvane is simply adjust the direction of the Windvane to the course you want to sail. So again, if you're turning this knob here, if I want to sail on a port tack with the wind on the port side of the boat, and I want to sail a straight course, remember this is the leading edge of the vane, and I'm looking over the transom, I would just simply turn this control knob here. I'd turn it around and around, and you'll see the vane is now slowly moving around, and that's now at 90 degrees to the boat. So if the wind was now coming straight across this way along the port side of the boat, the vane would go straight up vertical like that. So it's now standing in the air. The rudder would be in line with the boat and it's steering a straight course. And if the boat moves off course, port or starboard, this is going to flip or flop one way or the other, and that will then change the direction of the rudder in the water one way or the other and steer the boat. So that's basically how an auxiliary steering system works. Here you'll see how you've got a control line. So instead of having to come up the back to turn this control knob here to adjust the direction of the Windvane, you can actually use these ropes here in exactly the same way. It's like a worm drive, so you can do that from down in the safety of the cockpit. That's okay. The next thing to look at is this set of linkages here on the hydrovane. This is quite a cool system. It allows you to vary you've got a few adjusters here which allows you to vary the ratio that the Windvane moves the rudder in the water. It's like putting it up into gears, like your first gear, second gear, third gear, and so on. That's a pretty cool arrangement because it adjusts the sensitivity. And the other one is you've got an emergency steering system, so you can actually steer the boat. This is actually like a tiller on a boat. You can actually steer, you can put a pipe on that little arm there, and it's directly connecting to the rudder in the water. So you've got an emergency steering system. If your main ship's rudder or the steering system fails, this will actually steer the boat. So the beauty of an auxiliary rudder type Windvane is you have an automatic emergency rudder in the water, and you have a Windvane system which is completely independent of the ship's rudder. You literally tie the helm up or lock the ship's wheel, and it's all happening independently on the back. So there's nothing to go wrong with these ones. You just bolt them on the back and you don't have to do anything really. They just steer the boat for you. Another interesting point about that is that you can actually, if you can imagine a trim tab, now if you want to power the boat up and sail it fast, you've got to put the boat sometimes out of trim. So it means you've got the mainsail maybe overpowering the boat. I'll just pass this over to Jane and she can film this while I explain it. You hang on to that and show it on me. So if you are being a Jean-Luc in the world, he might want to have more mainsail than head sail, and it puts a bit of a load on the boat and you're not sure. You've got to put some helm in, or he's got a tiller, so you've got to hold the tiller up a little bit to make the boat steer in a straight course. You can actually do that before you engage the hydrovane. So you can power the boat up to sail fast, and if it means that the ship's tiller is 15 degrees to starboard, you can tie the tiller off to starboard, acting like a trim tab, and then engage the main rudder at the back. And it takes a bit of the pressure off the Windvane, because the overloading of the boat is taken up by the helm being a little bit further to starboard, say, and then it's going straight course, so you're going fast. And then you've actually got the auxiliary system, trim tab system, auxiliary rudder, Windvane system, steering the boat from there. So it's a really strong unit, just bolts on the back, incredible mounts and so on. So that's an auxiliary rudder Windvane system. Now I'll go over and try and explain a servo pendulum. And just before I do, I'll just explain once again this whole principle. I'll get you to hold the mic, Jane, of how the flip-flop works, because right at the moment the wind is coming straight down the bow of Kevin's boat. Okay, so imagine this is the flip-flop vane, the top, and remember, if I put the vane now, you can move it around like that, and say my thumb is the leading edge of this vane. If I turn it around so that it's coming straight down the boat like that, the vane will be vertical. It's got the counterweight. Now if this is the boat and I go slightly off course, see, the wind is now in the palm of my hand, so that would flop back that way. Okay, and then if I come back on course, as I'm coming back on course, this would come upright again, and the wind's now going either side. If I go off course the other way, it's going to flip back because the wind's now on the backhand of my hand. So that's the basic principle of how all wind vanes use a horizontal axis flip-flop vane to sense the direction they want to go in. Now if I want to alter my course, this is going to windward, if I want to make it a beam reach, okay, with the wind on the port side here, so I want to sail with the wind exactly at 90 degrees to my port side, I would just go click, 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 like that. Now this is the leading edge of the vane. It's at 90 degrees to the boat, and the winds, so the boat would now alter course, right? So I'm now sailing with the wind in my back at 90 degrees like that, and the rudder is amidships and it's sailing the course, okay? So if the boat then goes off course downwind, the wind's on the back of the vane and it's going to go this way. So the rudder would turn and pull me back on course. When I'm back on course, the vane would stand upright again. If it goes off course the other way, the wind is on this side on the palm of my hand and it's going to fall back the other way. So that's the common principle of the flip-flop vanes. Okay, so we'll look at that. So this is a servo pendulum system. And the most common type of wind vane steering gear. Okay, that's the first part. I'll go into the technicals in a minute. The difference here is that the part that's in the water doesn't actually steer the boat. It's not a rudder in the water. This just look me first. No, look at me. I'm explaining the general principle. Okay. And so this is a wind pilot. It's similar to the Aries, it's similar to the Monitor, it's similar to the Fleming wind vane. They're all using the same principle of what we call a servo pendulum rudder. And the principle is completely different because, as I say, this rudder in the water does not steer the boat. What it does is it actually steers through the ship's rudder. Now I'll just take this from Jane and show you a big difference. The first one is that you will see, if you've got a wheel, you've got a wheel drum there. See that drum in the middle of the wheel with the yellow ropes on it? And so this has got ropes going over to the side of the boat there, and it comes across here to the back of the boat, down through the system, and you will see those ropes. That red rope is connected there on either side of the boat, okay, either side of the Windvane rather. So these ropes are going to, when the Windvane's operational, they're actually going to turn the ship's wheel. All right, so the other thing is, if you didn't have a wheel and you had a tiller, you would still have the same ropes, but those ropes would come from port and starboard to the tiller, and they will move the tiller from one side to the other as the ropes are pulled. So one rope will be pulled in and the other rope will be let out. So the first principle is that the servo pendulum system is steering the boat through the ship's rudder. Now, how does that work? Well, you all know what this thing here is. This is a flip-flop Windvane. This is the flip-flop vane, the same as, just loosen this off a bit, the same as the hydrovane. It flips one way or flops the other, okay? And again, it's what we call a horizontal axis vane. The pivot point goes through here. It has a lead counterweight here to compensate for the weight of the vane, so that when it's in neutral, when it's vertical, it wants to stand up by itself. And again, if the wind's on one side, it flips or it flops, depending on what happens. Now, the next thing I want to show you, low battery, I better keep going, is that when that flip-flop vane goes, right, if I look here, you'll still see it's turning this little rudder here in the water, but it's not a rudder, that's just a blade. You'll see when it flips or flops, it goes one way or the other. All right, now I'll get Jane to hold the camera here. Now what happens is, you got to remember now, this one is not fixed. This blade can actually move to left or right. So it's not trying to steer the boat, but you can imagine what happens here. When that blade turns like that, the water on it, the water pressure as it's sliding past that rudder, is going to want to make it pivot up to the surface like that. If it turns one way, or if it turns the other way, it's going to pivot up to the surface the opposite way. Now that's what we call a pendulum. That's where it's swinging from one side to the other, just like the pendulum in a clock. And so when that pivots, if you then look at what happens to these ropes here, this is the tiller arm of the pendulum rudder. See, it's pulling one rope in and it's letting the other rope out, right? So you can see as this is going from side to side, that rope is getting pulled one way to the other. All right, and it's the power of the water which is actually driving and pulling those ropes. It's pulling it in, pulling one side in, letting one side out. So this is flip-flop vane, okay, that turns the servo rudder in the water. It turns it like this, and as that servo rudder is going through, when it goes this way, it pulls the blade to the surface that way, and as you're coming back on course, it'll go down. When you go off course and it flops the vane, it'll turn it the other way. The water follows this blade and it starts to come up to the surface on the other side. So that's the pendulum, servo pendulum system. It's got the flip-flop vane, turns the paddle in the water, but that's not steering the boat, it's just coming to the surface, pulling the ropes and steering the boat through the main ship's rudder. That's really about it. I hope that makes sense. So remember the two principles. The flip-flop vane, it's pretty easy to understand. As the boat's moving, it's going to go this way or that way. That's like the compass on electric autopilot. In a servo pendulum system, it's the power of the servo blade going left to right that's pulling ropes and moving the ship's rudder. Or with a auxiliary rudder system, okay, the rudder is a lot bigger and it's bolted in position, and it's the rudder that's actually steering the boat. Still using exactly the same flip-flop to sense whether it's on course and off course. And again, with these ones, this is the little adjuster there. You can adjust the course of the Windvane just by changing this knob here, and you'll see that the flip-flop vane at the top here is moving around to a beam reach, or you can put it wherever you like. So the reality is that they're all proprietary systems. There's no doubt that the Wind Pilot is steering a lot of boats around the world. The same with the Hydrovane. I've never met anyone with a Hydrovane that's not happy with them. They're very simple. They just bolt on the back of the boat, and it's a rudder system. They're really foolproof, and they've got some interesting advantages. The Servo pendulum systems like the Aries and like the Monitor and like the Wind Pilot, they're okay. They use a common principle, but there is a little bit of setup on all vanes, and when you're racing and you push the boat and get it out of balance and all that sort of stuff, it's all a challenge. Thanks.